He spent a year fighting for his country, only to return home and find a secret that could destroy everything. What did she hide from him? And will he ever forgive her? Randall Cross stepped off the bus, his boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud. The cool evening air of Halesburg wrapped around him, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and distant pine trees. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past year pressing down on his shoulders. He was supposed to be dead. That was what they told his unit after the ambush. The explosion had wiped out half his squad, and in the chaos, his body was never recovered. For weeks, he had drifted between life and death in enemy captivity, clinging to a sliver of hope that one day he would return home. And now, that day had come. But something felt off. The streets of his small hometown, once familiar and warm, seemed distant now. Streetlights flickered, and a few passing cars paid him no mind. No one knew he was alive. The military had cleared him, but there had been no time to send word ahead, no letters, no calls. He had wanted to see her face first. Lilith. The name alone sent a tremor through him. She had been his anchor, the one person he dreamed of during the darkest nights. Every bullet he dodged, every wound he survived, he had done it all with the thought of coming back to her. To the woman who had sworn to wait for him. His hands tightened into fists as he turned onto their street. The house stood just as he had left it, a cozy, white-walled home with a porch swing she used to love. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow onto the wooden steps. He took a step forward. Then, through the window, he saw movement. A shadow flickered past the curtains, and for a moment, his heart leaped at the thought of seeing her again. But then, another shape appeared. Smaller. A child. Randall's pulse pounded in his ears. He froze, breath hitching in his throat. The boy, no more than 6 months old, was cradled in Lilith's arms. His tiny hands reached for her hair, giggling as she nuzzled into him. Randall staggered back, his world tilting. This couldn't be happening. He had been gone for a year. The child was too young to be his. His heart clenched as he stepped onto the porch and knocked. Seconds stretched into eternity before the door creaked open. Lilith stood before him, eyes widening in sheer horror. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her face paled, her hands trembling as she clutched the baby closer to her chest. Randall's voice was raw when he finally spoke. "Lilith, what the hell is going on?" Lilith stood frozen in the doorway, her breath shallow, her grip tightening around the small child in her arms. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just stared, wide-eyed, as if looking at a ghost. Randall didn't blame her. For a year, she had believed he was dead. And now, without warning, he was standing in front of her, flesh and blood, his presence as real as the shock on her face. But Randall wasn't the only one who had been keeping secrets. His gaze dropped to the baby in her arms. The child shifted slightly, blinking up at him with soft brown eyes, eyes that looked far too familiar. A lump formed in Randall's throat, his pulse roaring in his ears. He took a shaky step forward, but Lilith instinctively took a step back, as if shielding the boy from him. That small movement was like a knife to his chest. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Who is he?" Lilith's lips parted, but no words came out. Randall swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. "I've been gone for a year, Lilith," he said, his tone low, strained. "That baby, he's not mine." "So whose is he?" Lilith let out a sharp breath, clutching the child closer as if afraid he would be ripped from her arms. Her fingers trembled against the fabric of the baby's onesie. She was panicking, he could see it in the way her chest rose and fell, in the way her gaze darted between him and the dark street behind him. She was searching for an escape. That realization sent a fresh wave of anger crashing over Randall. "You didn't even wait," he whispered, his voice laced with something raw, something broken. "Did you?" Lilith's eyes snapped back to his, and this time, there was something else there. Not just guilt. Not just fear. Something deeper. "Randall, please," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She hesitated. A beat of silence passed between them, heavy and suffocating. Then, from inside the house, a small noise broke the tension, the sound of a cooing baby. Randall's stomach twisted. The baby wasn't just some distant secret. He was here, in the home they had built together. His home. His wife. His entire world, shattered in front of him. "You should go," Lilith whispered. Randall's breath hitched. He took a step back, his hands curling into fists at his sides. A bitter laugh escaped his throat, though there was no humor in it. "Yeah," he muttered. "Maybe I should." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the only thing that had ever truly mattered to him. Randall didn't remember much of the walk away from the house. His body moved on instinct, his mind still struggling to process what he had just seen. The streets of Halesburg were quiet at this hour, the only sounds coming from the occasional passing car or the rustling of tree branches in the cool night air. But inside his head, there was nothing but noise. His pulse pounded. His thoughts screamed. His entire world, his wife, his home, his future, had just unraveled in a matter of minutes. A baby. Her baby. And not his. Randall clenched his jaw, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets as he walked aimlessly through town. He could still see the look on Lilith's face when she opened the door. That split second of horror before she masked it with something else, something he couldn't quite name. Guilt? Fear? Love? No. He couldn't let himself believe that. Not anymore. By the time he reached the motel on the outskirts of town, his limbs felt heavy, his chest tight. He hadn't planned on staying here. Hell, he hadn't planned on anything. He had pictured coming home to open arms, to a wife who had missed him as much as he had missed her. Instead, he had been met with the kind of betrayal that made his stomach churn. Inside the dimly lit lobby, an old man sat behind the desk, half watching a baseball game on a dusty television. He barely glanced at Randall as he slid a key across the counter. $35 a night. Cash only, the man grunted. Randall pulled a few bills from his pocket and took the key without a word. He didn't care about the price. He just needed a place to be alone. The room was as run down as he expected, peeling wallpaper, a sagging bed, the faint smell of stale cigarettes clinging to the air. None of it mattered. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. For the first time since stepping off that bus, the weight of it all crashed down on him. How had this happened? Had Lilith moved on that quickly? Had she mourned him at all? Had he really been so easy to replace? Randall squeezed his eyes shut, his chest tightening with something between rage and heartbreak. He had been through hell overseas, survived things most men wouldn't have. And through it all, he had clung to one thought, getting back to her. She had been his light. His reason. Now, she was a stranger. A knock at the door jolted him out of his thoughts. His head snapped up, his heart hammering in his chest. For a second, he thought, hoped, it might be her. That she had come to explain, to tell him there was some mistake, that she hadn't given up on him. But when he opened the door, it wasn't Lilith standing there. It was someone he hadn't seen in years. Randall hesitated before opening the door. His muscles were still tense from the shock of the night, and a deep part of him wasn't ready to face another surprise. But the knocking came again, firm, insistent. With a slow breath, he unlocked the door and pulled it open. Standing there, dressed in worn jeans and a weathered leather jacket, was Caleb Ward. Randall blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't seen Caleb in nearly 5 years, not since the guy had left town for the Marines. They had grown up together, played football on the same team, and even enlisted around the same time, though they had gone down different paths. Caleb's sharp blue eyes flickered with recognition and something else, relief. Shock. It was hard to tell. Well, damn, Caleb said, running a hand over his short-cropped hair. They told us you were dead. Randall gave a dry, humorless chuckle. Yeah. I got that a lot tonight. Caleb let out a breath, shaking his head. Man, it's really you. Randall didn't answer. He wasn't in the mood for reunions, especially not after what had just happened. Caleb seemed to sense it because he jerked his chin toward the inside of the room. You gonna let me in, or you wanna stand here looking like you're about to punch someone? Randall stepped aside, and Caleb entered, taking in the dingy motel room with a raised brow. This the hero's welcome they gave you? He asked. Randall shut the door behind him. Didn't exactly give anyone time to roll out a parade. Caleb sat on the edge of the chair near the small motel table, resting his arms on his knees. He studied Randall, his expression shifting from casual to serious. She knows you're back. Randall let out a bitter laugh. Yeah. She knows. Something in his tone must have given it away because Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Didn't go the way you thought, did it? Randall stayed silent, running a hand over his face. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to picture Lilith standing in that doorway, a baby in her arms, looking at him like he was a ghost instead of her husband. Caleb exhaled. Look, man. I don't know what happened. But I do know that when they declared you Kia, Lilith, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. She didn't take it well. Randall clenched his jaw. Didn't take it well. What does that mean, Caleb? Caleb leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. It means she was barely functioning for months. She shut down. Wouldn't leave the house. Wouldn't talk to anyone. It was bad, man. Real bad. Randall swallowed, trying to push down the conflicting emotions rising in his chest. That wasn't the story he had told himself in his head. In his mind, she had moved on quickly, easily, replacing him without a second thought. But Caleb's words painted a different picture, one of a woman drowning in grief. Randall didn't know what to do with that. Caleb studied him. I don't know what you saw tonight, but before you decide to hate her, make sure you have the whole truth. Randall scoffed. The whole truth? I think I saw enough. Caleb sighed but didn't argue. He stood up, pulling a slip of paper from his pocket and placing it on the table. My number, he said. You're back from the dead, man. That's gotta mess with your head. You need anything, you call me. Randall didn't respond as Caleb headed for the door. But just before stepping out, his old friend turned back. One more thing, Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. That kid, don't be so sure he's not yours. And with that, he was gone. Randall sat there long after the door closed, staring at the paper Caleb had left behind. Don't be so sure he's not yours. The words played over and over in his head, but he couldn't make sense of them. How could the baby be his? How could anything still make sense after the day he just had? Randall barely slept. The motel room was silent except for the occasional hum of cars passing on the highway, but his mind refused to settle. He lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night over and over again. Lilith. The baby. Caleb's words. That kid, don't be so sure he's not yours. It was impossible. He had been deployed for over a year, and the boy was no older than 6 months. The math didn't add up. And yet, doubt gnawed at him. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the thin motel curtains, he was done waiting for answers. He needed the truth. The drive back to the house was slow, not because of traffic. Halesburg never had traffic, but because Randall wasn't sure how to prepare for what came next. What if she refused to talk? What if the truth was worse than he imagined? The last time he had stood on this porch, it had nearly broken him. Now, as he reached the front steps again, he forced himself to take a steadying breath. This time, he wasn't leaving without answers. He knocked. It took longer than the night before, but eventually, the door opened. Lilith stood there, dressed in an oversized sweater and leggings, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. She had been crying. Her gaze flickered with hesitation, but she didn't close the door on him. That was something. "You came back," she said quietly. "You owe me the truth," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. She exhaled and stepped aside. "Come in." The house was just as he remembered, the same furniture, the same pictures on the walls, but it felt different. The air was heavier, like it carried the weight of everything left unsaid between them. She led him into the living room, where a baby monitor sat on the coffee table. A faint sound came through it, a soft, rhythmic breathing. The baby was asleep. Randall's chest tightened. Lilith sat on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. He didn't sit. He needed to stay standing, needed to hold on to whatever strength he had left. "You think I betrayed you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Randall scoffed. "Didn't you?" She flinched but didn't look away. "I didn't sleep with anyone else, Randall." His breath caught. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling. "The baby, his name is Ezra. And he is yours." Randall felt like the ground had just shifted beneath him. "That's not possible," he said, shaking his head. "I was already deployed." "You left in March," she interrupted, her voice cracking. "You don't remember, do you? The night before you shipped out." His stomach twisted. Of course, he remembered. That last night together had been desperate, filled with the unspoken fear that he might never come back. But he had never imagined. Lilith swallowed hard. "I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after you left. I was going to tell you, Randall. I wrote letters, I tried calling. But then." Her breath hitched, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. "Then they told me you were dead." The words slammed into him like a punch to the gut. "You don't know what that was like," she continued, her voice raw with emotion. Hearing those words. Seeing them bring a folded flag to the door. "I wanted to die that day, Randall. I swear to God, I wanted to die." He stared at her, his own throat tightening. He had never thought about it from her side, what it must have been like to get that news, to believe it. "I carried Ezra alone," she whispered. "I went through everything alone. And then, one day, I looked at him, and he had your eyes, and it broke me all over again." Randall's chest ached. He wanted to speak, to say something, but no words came. Lilith wiped at her tears. "I wasn't with anyone else. I didn't replace you. I never even thought about it. But when you knocked on my door last night, I panicked. Because I thought I had imagined you standing there." She finally met his gaze, her eyes pleading. "I never stopped loving you, Randall. But you have to tell me, can you ever forgive me for believing you were gone?" Randall inhaled sharply. Forgive her? She had done nothing wrong. All this time, he had been drowning in anger, convinced she had betrayed him, when in reality, she had been suffering just as much as he had. His gaze shifted toward the baby monitor, listening to the steady sound of their son breathing. His son. Randall closed his eyes for a moment, feeling something in his chest crack open. This wasn't what he had expected when he came home. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what he needed. Randall had been trained to handle chaos. On the battlefield, when bullets flew and orders screamed through the comms, he had learned to push aside emotion and focus on survival. But standing in his own living room, Hearing Lilith's words echo in his mind, he realized nothing in his training had prepared him for this. He had a son. A son who had lived 6 months of his life without him. A son who had learned to laugh, to reach for his mother's touch, to sleep peacefully in a crib that Randall hadn't even known existed. His hands clenched at his sides, his breathing uneven. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel: anger, regret, relief. It was all tangled together, tightening around his chest like a noose. Lilith was watching him carefully. She had told him the truth, but now she was waiting. Waiting for him to say something. Waiting for him to decide what he was going to do. "I should see him," Randall finally said, his voice quieter than he expected. Lilith's expression shifted, something unreadable passing over her face. "You want to see Ezra?" she asked, as if she hadn't dared to hope he would say those words. He swallowed, nodding. Without another word, she stood and led him down the short hallway. The door to what had once been their guest room was slightly ajar. She pushed it open, and Randall stepped inside. The nursery was simple but warm. A soft blue blanket draped over the crib, a rocking chair in the corner, shelves lined with a few stuffed animals and baby books. It was a space built with love, a love he should have been here to give. And in the crib, tiny and peaceful, lay Ezra. Randall's breath caught in his throat. The baby's small chest rose and fell with each steady breath. His tiny fingers were curled into fists, his dark lashes resting against round, chubby cheeks. Randall took a slow step closer. Even in sleep, there was no mistaking it. Ezra had his nose. His jawline. The same crease between his brows that Randall had been told he always made when he was deep in thought. His son. A strange, aching feeling swelled in his chest, something almost painful in its intensity. It wasn't just love. It was the weight of everything he had missed. The late nights, the first laughs, the tiny moments of wonder. Moments he could never get back. Lilith stood beside him, watching him carefully. "You can hold him if you want." Randall's fingers twitched at his sides. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But the fear was there, too, thick and suffocating. "I don't know how," he admitted. A small, sad smile touched Lilith's lips. "You'll learn." Carefully, she reached into the crib and lifted Ezra, cradling him close for a moment before turning to Randall. "Here," she whispered, gently placing the baby into his arms. The moment Ezra's tiny weight settled against him, Randall felt everything inside him shift. His son was warm, real, and impossibly small. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake, his soft face pressing against Randall's chest. Something inside Randall cracked wide open. All the anger, all the resentment, gone. In its place was something else entirely. A silent vow. He had been gone for too long, but he was here now. And no matter what, he would never let Ezra feel that kind of absence again. Lilith exhaled beside him, as if sensing the shift. "I wanted him to know you, Randall," she whispered. "Even when I thought you weren't coming back." Randall swallowed hard, his grip tightening around his son. "I'm here now," he said quietly. Lilith nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Yeah," she whispered. "You are." Randall sat in the rocking chair, his arms cradling Ezra's tiny body, the weight of his son grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. The baby slept soundly against his chest, his soft breaths warm against Randall's skin. It was surreal, this moment, this reality. Just hours ago, he had been convinced Lilith had betrayed him. Now, he sat in a nursery he never knew existed, holding the son he never knew he had. Lilith sat on the edge of the crib, watching them with an unreadable expression. The dim light of the nursery cast a glow over her face, and for the first time since he had returned, she looked less like a stranger and more like the woman he had fallen in love with. "You're good with him," she said softly. Randall let out a short, almost disbelieving chuckle. I've been holding him for 10 minutes, Lilith. That doesn't mean I know what I'm doing. She smiled faintly, her eyes flickering to Ezra. Instincts kick in fast when it's your own. Randall glanced down at his son, his throat tightening. Yeah. They do. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the quiet creaking of the rocking chair. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but it was heavy, filled with all the things they had yet to say. Lilith shifted, tucking her legs beneath her. When they told me you were gone, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had ripped the ground out from under me. I kept thinking there had to be a mistake. That maybe they got the names wrong, or maybe you'd show up and tell me it was all just a nightmare. Randall closed his eyes for a brief moment. He had been through hell overseas, but the thought of Lilith going through her own private war back home, alone, made his chest ache. She exhaled shakily. I wanted to call your parents, but I didn't even know what to say. And then, a few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. She let out a soft, humorless laugh. You'd think that would have given me something to hold on to. But for a long time, it just made everything harder. Because you weren't here. And I didn't know how I was supposed to do it without you. Randall swallowed hard. You shouldn't have had to. Lilith shook her head. But I did. And I made peace with it, or, at least, I thought I did. I told myself I'd raise Ezra the best I could. That I'd tell him about you, about the kind of man his father was. And then last night, you showed up on my doorstep, and suddenly everything I thought I knew didn't make sense anymore. Randall shifted Ezra slightly, brushing a thumb over the baby's tiny fingers. I was angry, he admitted. I thought you'd moved on. I thought I didn't matter anymore. You always mattered, Lilith whispered. I never stopped loving you, Randall. Even when I thought you were gone. Especially then. He looked up at her, something in her gaze making his breath catch. For so long, he had carried the belief that he had been forgotten. That the life he had left behind had continued without him, that he had been nothing more than a painful memory tucked away in the past. But sitting here, with his son asleep in his arms and Lilith looking at him like he was something worth holding on to, he realized how wrong he had been. Do you think we can fix this? He asked quietly, his voice rough. Lilith's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. She glanced down, her fingers twisting together in her lap. I don't know, she admitted. A year is a long time, Randall. And we've both changed. He nodded, his chest tightening. But I do know that I don't want to do this without you, she continued, meeting his gaze. Not anymore. Randall exhaled, something in his chest loosening just slightly. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was something. A chance. And for the first time since stepping off that bus, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was finally home. The days following that moment in the nursery felt like a slow unraveling of the past, piece by piece. Randall stayed at Lilith's house, though it wasn't easy. It wasn't just the unfamiliarity of the place, the echoes of a life he hadn't been a part of. It was the weight of the decisions ahead of him, of trying to figure out where he belonged in a world that had kept turning without him. He had no answers yet, but for the first time in years, he felt the pull of something real, something worth fighting for. Ezra became a constant in his life, the little things like his laughter and the way his eyes would light up when Randall made faces at him, small, but significant pieces of the puzzle he was desperately trying to put together. Every time the baby looked at him, it was like Randall was reminded of how much had been lost, but also how much was still left to rebuild. Lilith was just as much a mystery to him now as she had been the night he first saw her again, but she was also something more. There were moments, like when she held his hand while they watched Ezra fall asleep, where everything felt like it was falling back into place. But there were other times, when she turned away, her eyes distant or filled with quiet regret, when Randall remembered just how much time had passed. They spoke more now, though the words didn't always come easily. But they tried. And that was something. One evening, as the sun began to set and the house was filled with the soft hum of the evening, Lilith sat beside him on the couch, her hand resting on the armrest near his. He could feel the space between them, the silent questions hanging in the air, but for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence didn't feel like a barrier. "I know I'm asking a lot, Randall," Lilith said, breaking the silence in a quiet, hesitant voice. "But I need to know, what do you want? What do you want from me? From this? From us?" He didn't have an immediate answer. There were 1,000 things he could say, 1,000 roads he could choose, but in that moment, none of them felt right. Instead, he turned to her, his voice steady. "I want to be here. I want to be the man you and Ezra need me to be." Lilith's eyes softened, a small, fragile smile playing at her lips. "And if I'm not the same woman you left behind?" Randall reached for her hand, gently holding it in his. "We can figure that out," he said. "But we'll do it together." They sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air, but somehow it didn't feel so heavy. For the first time, Randall wasn't so focused on the past, on all the things that had gone wrong. He was focused on the now, the small, quiet moments with Lilith, the way his son would smile at him, the way he could hear Lilith's soft breath beside him as she quietly watched their son sleep. There was no grand declaration of love, no sweeping promises of a perfect future. But in the space between them, in the way their hands fit together so naturally, Randall knew there was something more. As the night wore on, and Ezra stirred in his crib with the first signs of waking, Randall found himself at peace for the first time in a long while. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future would look like. But for the first time since stepping off that bus, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. And maybe that was enough. The path ahead would be uncertain, full of challenges and moments of doubt, but Randall knew one thing for sure: he wasn't walking it alone anymore. He had his family, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough to build a future on. The story of Randall, Lilith, and Ezra is a powerful reminder of how life can change in the blink of an eye. It explores the complexity of love, loss, and the long, often painful journey back to each other after a time of separation. Randall's emotional journey from anger and betrayal to forgiveness and acceptance mirrors the struggles that many face in real life when dealing with miscommunication, unexpected twists, and the weight of past choices. At its core, this story is about the potential for growth, not just as individuals, but as a family. While Randall and Lilith are both scarred by the time lost, they slowly rebuild their trust and find a way forward together, not as they were, but as the people they have become. The ending offers hope, not for a perfect or fairy tale resolution, but for the possibility of healing through effort, patience, and a willingness to confront hard truths. This is a beautiful exploration of redemption in the way we can rebuild what we thought was broken, even when it seems impossible. The quiet moments of connection, like Randall holding Ezra or their shared silence, show that sometimes the most significant steps forward don't come from grand gestures, but from the simple act of showing up and being present. In the end, it's a story that reminds us that life, no matter how fractured, can always be rebuilt with love, understanding, and the courage to start again.